I remember that Sanford was, at that time in the 80s, the place where it was student housing for married couples. And so I never to this day have graced the doors of this hall. And to me, at that point in time in my life, I can remember I was 18 years old thinking, how are you married in college? So I never went into this building. I can't wait for it to open and ComArts to be in there. I've never entered the doors. Georgia Southern was at that time about 6,000 students. It was the kind of campus where you could know a lot of people. You often saw the same people over and over again. We established a lot of friends in our classrooms. The classes were small. I think probably my largest class was psychology, Dr. Dewey, and there might have been probably 80 to 100 students in that class, which was large at that time, but he made it an amazing class anyway. I think my first memory is, of course, registration, and that was at that time at Hanner Gym. There were tables set up, and you would go to each table to register for the class. And of course, this was before computers. This was 1980, the fall of 1980. And I can remember standing in very long lines in Hanner registering for my first class. I remember that tuition was $300 a quarter. I just remember that we spent the majority of our time in buildings that looked, in my opinion, to be rather both older here on Sweetheart Circle and some of the more contemporary buildings that had been built in the 60s and such there in the main part of the campus. During the 80s, early 80s, our ComArts department classes, the majority of them were in a Hollis building. But I do recall that my journalism classes were in the biology building, which makes no sense at all. But I can remember exactly where it was, where we took journalism and where Pam Borland Davis, taught me intro to journalism and PR news and writing. And but most of them were in Hollis though. And even I can remember taking television production, and it was in Hollis. I can remember exactly where the studio was. I can remember creating a commercial. I have volunteered in nonprofits, but I can remember creating my first commercial, and it had to do with the adoption of animals. I also loved the thought, I remember Dick Johnson, Dr. Johnson taught us oral interpretation, and I can remember presenting something to the class one time, and I can remember bringing him to tears, and I thought, oh yes, this has worked really well. And I ended up making an A in oral interpretation, which of course today I bet students don't even take anything such as oral interpretation. And I'd have to go back to the old textbooks to see what it is exactly we were studying with oral interpretation, but it was about, interpreting literature and then getting up in front of classes and presenting our take on what that literature meant to us. I remember speech class in Hollis, and remember getting in front of the classes and having to extemporaneously speak on a topic. And the Hollis building was a great place. No matter what we do in our careers, coming out of ComArts school, you're going to always integrate with those other disciplines. And even though my discipline was public relations, I have always worked with the broadcasters. I've worked with the radio people. I've worked with the public relations practitioners as well. And so that's going to be the true beauty of this school, being all consolidated together in one place where everybody can work together, because that's the real world. And that design is perfect going into this next decade or two, so that we'll really prepare these students and have everybody together in one tight place where they can continue to work together well.